Washington football team. That's right. Washington football team. Still sounds every bit as weird in February to say it as it did back in August or September. After all those years of referring to them by that other name, at least for now, they're the Washington football team. It's strange. And it's kind of fitting for the weird season that was 2020, that an organization like Washington would have had a lot of swirl going on even before the season took place, and honestly, throughout the course of the entirety of the season. From the whole saga of whether or not they were going to change their name and get rid of the old Redskins moniker to when they actually did, but then are not going to come up with an official long-term name. They're just going to call themselves the Washington football team, like they're some fourth-grade soccer club or something like that. To the hiring of Ron Rivera as their new head coach, which you look at it and you say, hey, you're replacing Jay Gruden with Ron Rivera, Riverboat Ron, a guy that's coached a team to multiple playoff appearances, taken the Carolina Panthers previously to a Super Bowl, got an MVP season out of Cam Newton. Like, hey, it feels like a pretty big upgrade. It's a really good get for Washington. And then you find out before the season starts that Ron Rivera's got leukemia, and he's going to have to undergo treatment for cancer during the course of the damn season. And then you get to the whole thing of 2020 was going to be the season where Dwayne Haskins took that next step forward, and Dwayne Haskins was going to show whether or not once and for all he was that guy. Well, you ultimately found out he wasn't that guy, but maybe not in the way you necessarily envisioned. And, you got all the crap about this team was 2-5 at the bye, where you're looking at this team with all the invested in the defensive front, all those current and former first-round picks in that unit. You're sitting there saying to yourself, man, this defense should dominate, and in the first few weeks of the season they don't. Mix in everything that was going with the Alex Smith comeback story and the fact that people were wondering if he would ever even suit up again, to he does suit up and he actually plays several games in the season. And all of that. The Washington team was still able to get to a point from the playing of Dwayne Haskins and the benching of Haskins to the starting and benching of Kyle Allen to the starting and then he's injured and then he's in and then he's injured Alex Smith to you get all the way to week 17, a Sunday night game against the Eagles. Winner, chicken dinner. You win and you're in. With a losing record at that, you can win the NFC least. And then the Eagles made sure in that fourth quarter that they jobbed themselves the hell out by benching Jalen Hurts. And the Redskins were basically handed, when all was said and done, the NFC least title, which gave them a home playoff game against the eventual Super Bowl champion, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where you saw Taylor Heineke, of all people, their fourth starting quarterback on the season, really stick a game to Tampa. And Washington was a lot more competitive than you might have anticipated. And while they ultimately lost, I think it was 31-23 on that night, what a fitting end to this crazy, crazy season for Washington. All the turmoil and all the ups and downs and all the saga, and you almost won a playoff game with a losing record. So when you look at this season, like offensively, it's never ideal to start two quarterbacks in a season, let alone three. And sure as hell isn't when you got to start four different ones, and especially when you're on QB4 when it comes to your home playoff game as a team with a losing record. This is a team, regardless of who was playing quarterback, like, you could blame and crap on Dwayne Haskins all you want, but the reality is that he wasn't the only one that this team consistently struggled to move the ball with offensively. They all struggled. Heineke showed you as much as anything at the playoff game. Antonio Gibson had an okay rookie season. Terry McLaurin was the one real consistent true threat in the passing game. He's been a godsend for this Washington team since they took him 2019 in that third round out of Ohio State. But defensively, like I mentioned, they started off very poorly. They had 4 straight games where they allowed 30-plus points. But when all came to pass, like they really started to piece it together, especially as the season got into its home stretch. They finished second in the league against the pass, second in total yards allowed per game. Chase Young, the kid that you took number 2 overall, you were envisioning being your Julius Peppers type of player, was for all intents and purposes, and he was the defensive rookie of the year. Another former first-round pick, Montez Sweat, finished with 9 sacks. But even when you look at all of this, like, it still comes down to the fact that their offense couldn't move the ball. They had all that turmoil with the quarterback position. You know it was bad with Dwayne Haskins. And I know I did a video on it during the course of the year, like how dumb it was to go away from Dwayne Haskins. And some of it's a good reminder for me that we don't know everything sometimes, and there are other things that are at play that have to be considered. I get that, and yeah, I kind of was wrong about that. But then you know it's really bad when you are in a Week 17 winning you're in scenario for the playoffs, and this kid that you just took the previous year with the 15th overall pick, who's a quarterback, when you really need a quarterback, you decide, we're going to cut him instead. What a turbulent season, tumultuous season, drama-filled season for this Washington team. And all of it was rewarded with a playoff appearance, a home playoff game, and a division title with a damn losing record. Unbelievable. So you get through all of that, and maybe if you're watching, you say, hey, we come through on the other side, and we're better off for the experience. And they probably are, admittedly. They seem well positioned because you've got some young talent on that team, especially in that defense, that'll have another year under Ron Rivera's system. Like, this unit could get better in 2021. You look at them and you say, okay, you've got some cap space, maybe $50 million, a little bit more, to go invest some in free agency. Maybe you work a little bit on the secondary and defense, but more notably, you need to work on that offensive side of the ball, especially the skill talent. Then you certainly could do that. But then you also have some decisions to make in terms of your own free agents. Brandon Scherf, Ryan Kerrigan, are you going to bring him back? Kevin Pierre-Louis, Ronald Darby, Dustin Hopkins. But the good thing is if you want to keep all of those guys or most of those guys, you have enough cap space to be able to do that and still be a little active in free agency, and I certainly expect that they would be. But I think what it comes down to is what's the approach that they're going to take with that offense, and most notably and specifically the quarterback position heading into 2021. I wonder if Ron Rivera is going to kind of take that approach, which he's kind of mentioned before, that not everybody needs to have a franchise quarterback in order to win Super Bowls. And for Washington fans, it's kind of a mixed bag when you hear that. You say, well, you know what? We did win 3 Super Bowls during the Gibbs era of the early 80s to early 90s with 3 different quarterbacks, none of whom will ever be in Canton. That's true. And that is true, whether it be Theismann or Doug Williams or Mark Rippon. But then you also want to sit there and say to yourself, after all the heartbreak of RG3 not being the guy, to potentially thinking Kirk Cousins could at least be some version of the guy before ultimately he was run out and shown the door, you probably are ready to have somebody that you could really latch onto at that quarterback position for a long time to come. And you also know that Alex Smith really isn't that good anymore. Like, I know I've been critical of Alex Smith over the years, but it's more in relation to where people valued him versus what he actually was. I would never have said he was a scrub. Or if I ever did, that was just for sensationalism, But he was never great. Like, he's a game manager type, an okay, solid, average NFL starting quarterback, but not a franchise guy, certainly not as hell an elite guy at all. So the Redskins have to go into this offseason, and they've got to find that long-term answer at quarterback. Whether that be in the trade market. Like, do they get froggy when it comes to somebody like Derek Carr? Do they potentially try to pursue somebody else? I'm surprised they didn't put up a bigger offer for Matthew Stafford, because that would have felt like a perfect scenario to bring him in and would have been right up Ron Rivera's alley. But more likely than not, they need to find a young quarterback in this draft. And unless they're going to sit there and instead of Carr, maybe they go and trade for a Marcus Mariota from the Raiders, and then I'm just sitting there saying, okay, so you're bringing in a somewhat different version of Alex Smith with similar durability concerns when you have to put the team on his back. Like, maybe you go get really froggy and you want to get nuts and you go make Jameis Winston a big offer in the offseason. But bottom line is, Washington needs to get a quarterback. Whether that's in round 1 of the draft, round 2 of the draft, round 3 of the draft, they need to get a young quarterback. They got to find a guy. Because you cannot go through the same turmoil, the same saga that you did in 2020 and expect it to work out well in 2021. And then once you do that, your primary focus has to be on the offensive side of the ball. Because even if you get a upgrade or significant upgrade at the quarterback position, Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson are not nearly going to be enough to get the damn job done. And I don't care if you want to talk about the Sims guys and say that they're enough. They're not enough. You need another big threat, another big weapon in that wide receiving core. You could potentially argue 2, but you certainly would argue 1 because you want to take some pressure off of your one stud that you've got in Terry McLaurin. I also look at running back and say, Darius Geis, this is being the point in time where he should have really established himself as being the dude, but he got cut, speaking of saga and drama, before the season because of off-the-field shit. Do you really trust Antonio Gibson as your true bellwether bell cow back, or do you trust him more as like a secondary change of pace, third down back, pass catching type of back? So I look at those skill positions, and I would say if you're Washington, like those first 3 rounds, you probably want to come out of it with some combination of quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and then maybe some depth on that offensive line, specifically the tackle position. The Washington offensive line was graded pretty well, did a pretty good job this past year, but you start to look at them, a lot of those guys are reaching the age of 30. You look at the tackle position and you say, okay, do you expect them to be able to hold out again? But the truth of the matter is that it's weird because Washington won their division, but they had a losing record. But their quarterback situation was a total mess. You also had a head coach undergoing cancer treatments throughout the course of the season. You had another former second-round pick that you had put some hopes on in terms of that running game. You ended up having to cut him. Like, a lot of saga, a lot of drama, name change, you name it. But if Washington plays their cards out right, like, they could get better, and they can get quite a bit better in this offseason and be positioned again, this time with a winning record potentially, to win the NFC least.